name is Margaret. I am a historical costumer and textile conservator in training, and today's video is all about making an 1860s underwear set. So this set consists of a chemise and also a pair of split drawers, and then there's also a corset which will be in the next video. You may be seeing a very similar outfit in that one. I am still making the Madame de Pompadour robe a la Francaise. That is coming. I've hit a big roadblock though. I have 18th century pinking shears, both antique and reproductions, and none of them are sharpened. So I will be taking a little skip, hop, and a jump over to Colonial Williamsburg later this sort of spring, summer-ish, and after that I will be getting back to that project. I just bought flower making tools for all the flowers on that dress, so don't worry, that's coming, it's happening. But in the meantime, I did not want to just not sew. It's summertime, that's when I get most of my sewing done. I don't know why. I knit in the fall and the winter, and I sew in the spring and summer. It's just something that happens to come about every single year. Didn't want to not have a sewing project, so I decided to start on my next big ensemble, which is an 1860s changeable gown. So this ensemble is going to consist of a chemise, some split drawers, a corset, a cage crinoline, an elliptical cage crinoline, a petticoat to go over that cage crinoline, and then a 4-piece dress, a skirt, 2 bodices, 1 day, 1 evening, and then sort of a sash belt situation. I will definitely be making a bit more of a designing process and showing you kind of the ins and outs of what that dress is going to look like when we get to actual dress, but for right now it's just chemise and drawers time. Chemises were sort of the primary mode of women's underwear for a couple hundred years. In the 18th century, it's just the linen shifter chemise, which you're probably familiar with, very iconic if you do 18th century dressmaking. Once we get into the 19th century, we start seeing drawers being adopted, specifically split crotch drawers, which are these kind of like open, essentially it's like 2 tubes tied around your waist. Very interesting, which allowed someone to relieve themselves without having to like take off everything. If you want to learn more about that, I will put down below a Bernadette Banner video, which sort of goes into that whole situation. But in the mid-19th century, they were big, okay? They were big. 1860s, split crotch drawers were big. I do love doing things in a historical practice sort of way. It's sort of a bit of experimental archaeology for me, as I am a textile conservator and I work with a lot of antique pieces. So it's a way of me trying to figure out how they were actually put together. For this specific project, I started out using a historical pattern, a chemise pattern from an 1860 edition of Peterson's magazine. I will link that pattern down below if you want to go check it out. But as you will see in this video, that pattern was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. The person who published that, and I don't know who they are, but I want to give them a piece of my mind, they decided that they were going to put every single piece of the pattern in a different scale. So none of this pattern is to scale with itself, meaning that you have to scale up every piece individually, which is just not cool. And I did not realize that until I started drafting it, which you will see. So by the time I finished that chemise, which I also entirely hand sewed, not necessarily to be historically accurate, at this point in history in the 1860s, sewing machines were becoming quite widely available to the public. But because I like watching Netflix and it's easier to hand sew while watching Netflix than it is to machine sew, frankly. By the time I finished that chemise, after it taking me 6 days and essentially just throwing drafting out the window and creating a sculptural piece of clothing, I decided that I was going to get a truly Victorian pattern for the drawers. And to be honest with you, I think they came out great. Truly Victorian is a pattern company I really like because it is a more historically rooted pattern. I find that there's a lot of historical details in their patterns that you aren't necessarily going to find in, say, a Big 4 pattern company pattern. So I would definitely recommend that pattern. I will drop it down below as well. They also have a chemise in that pattern, and I should have just followed that at the start because guess what? Peterson's pattern was not super fun. So you'll kind of see my different processes of making the chemise and drawer set, with the chemise being more historical practice and the drawers being a bit more just let's sew this and get this done and move on to something far more interesting. Because let's face it, white on white sewing is not the most interesting thing of all time. So with that being said, let's get to making. So starting out with the chemise, I decided to follow a more historical practice route with this particular object. So I got a pattern off the internet from Peterson's magazine from the year of 1860. And I thought this would be really fun using original pattern, and I started drafting it out. As you can see here, I took the measurement from sort of my center back point down to where I wanted to hit, which was about 30 inches. And then I used that measurement to sort of figure out the ratio for the other measurements. So I was able to draft that back piece pretty easy. And that's when the ease of this project stopped happening. Okay, so I've drafted all my pieces and cut them out. But the problem with this pattern is that it is from a magazine, but none of the pieces are in the same scale as the other ones, so I had to scale them up basically all on a different scale. So I'm gonna hope for the best here. I didn't really make a mock-up because that sounded like work. So here we go. So I didn't even make a mock-up, I just kind of cut some pieces out of muslin, have this piece in paper here, and are just trying to figure it out. Wish me luck. This is definitely going to be an adventure. So in the end, I did get something that fit really actually quite well, but it was definitely more of a trial and error process than it was a strict drafting process. So after I got a rough idea of what my pieces were going to look like, I did cut them out of this cotton batiste. I got this online, and I'll be honest, it's pretty nice fabric, except for the fact that there was some kind of manufacturing processing error on probably the last half of the bolt. So when we get to the drawers, you'll see it has this really crinkled, ruffly texture, but totally fine for a set of drawers. But I was able to cut the good pieces for this chemise. I then lined up the side seams with the gores, just backstitch these together, and then flat felled those seams to make this a really nice and streamlined garment. I probably should have washed the cotton before I did this, because I'll probably have to wash the cotton at some point, but you know, we're going to cross that bridge when we come to it. Do as I say, not as I do, please. So then once I sort of got everything together, I left the front seam open for now, just in case I needed to do any sort of alterations to it. I did a rolled hem on the top of the back, cutting off all of the unnecessary seam allowance, and then I put the entire piece on my mannequin. I then sort of used my mannequin, which has very similar bust measurements. The waist and hips measurement are a bit off, but the same bust measurement, and just gathered it down so that'll fit me. I gathered the back, and then I gathered the front, and then I sort of played with the yoke a little bit and eventually tacked that down. At this point in time, I also sewed most of the center front seam. I then cut out the sleeves. I actually did this twice because they were a little bit off, but you know what? It worked out in the end. It was all good. And then I hemmed the sleeves as well. I leveled the bottom hem of the chemise, and I did a little roll hem there. It was almost too short, but it ended up being okay just with that nice rolled hem. I then flat felled the yoke seam and the rest of the center front seam just to make sure it's nice on the inside. And I also did a rolled hem on the top of the yoke just to sort of finish that off. So that's it for the main construction of this piece. I then found some beautiful sort of shell buttons in my stash, some very small ones. And I figured out where I wanted to place them. I marked the buttonholes, measured the buttonholes, and then sewed the buttonholes by hand, just packing together some whip stitches essentially. I didn't even really do a buttonhole stitch for this. I then sewed on the buttons and added lace around the neckline to secure both the gathers on the back and to also create a very delicate silhouette in the front. So then I moved on to the drawers. The fabric, again, I said it was this cotton batiste. It was a little bit rumply, so this was a good use for it. You're not really going to see this on the outside of any costume. It doesn't bother me too much. So after sort of the drafting process of the chemise and that just being really quite difficult, and honestly the entire process being somewhat time consuming, as I did hand sew the entire chemise as you saw. I do love hand sewing. It allows me to, you know, watch Netflix during that process, but I did want to get this project done at some point in time, so I'm using less historical techniques for these drawers. I used Truly Victorian 106 because, you know what? I probably could have used the chemise from this pattern too. These patterns are really nice. I do like them a lot because they are, you know, historically cut as much as you can in a commercially available paper pattern. So I would recommend this pattern if you're looking for a 1960s chemise and drawer pattern. So I cut it out. I used French seams to seam up the legs on my sewing machine. I attached the waistband together, and then I attached the two waistbands right sides together, bagged it out, pressed it, and set that aside. I bound the crotch seam with some very fun mid-century bias binding that I had in my stash. This is not historically accurate at all, but again, I wanted to get the drawers done because there are more exciting things to come in this process. I then sewed the waistband on and overlapped the back of the drawers by about 1 inch. I then pressed the seam allowance of the interior of the waistband in towards itself and then used slip stitches to secure it to the rest of the garment. And then of course, I added more pearl buttons on the front to close it. I did hand do the buttonholes here as well, sewed the buttons on and trimmed it with a same bit of lace around the cuffs, which I just hemmed with a sort of a double fold and a plain whip stitch. Wrap-up time for this little ensemble. So first up, I just want to say I am wearing my little Spanx. I will get you up close. I'm wearing my little Spanx bodysuit Delia buffer because this is kind of a sheer fabric, and I felt like that was the way to go. So if you're seeing this, Spanx, okay? Good to know. So all in all, I gotta say I like the finished product. I feel like an egg. I feel like I'm a Little Women, but also like maybe ready for an interpretive egg dance at any point in time. I like the bloomers. I do have to say they're pretty simple, but I do like the fact that the Truly Victorian pattern still has the shaping to the waistband. It gives them definitely a more authentic feel. I love the chemise. I love, and we'll get up close here, I love the neckline. I think this is so cool. I don't know how I did it, but it fits so well. I seriously don't know how I did it. The one thing I will say is I think the back piece is a little bit generously cut. A little too generously cut, to be honest with you, because it's a little bit too eggy. You know, it's a little bit too much of a souffle. It definitely bunches up around my corset, which you will see in the next video, but I love these little fluttery sleeves, and it hangs at just the perfect point on my shoulders, and it's at just the perfect point on my décolletage. So all in all, I think that getting to this point in the process with the chemise was incredibly difficult. I don't ever want to work with the Peterson's magazine again because that was ridiculous. And you probably heard in the voiceover how much I don't understand why they did it like that. But I think the product is good. The bloomers, on the other hand, our little split drawers, were 5 times easier, 10 times easier, so much easier. And I like the product just as much. So I think that I like the fact that I did a little bit more historically accurate, you know, using primary sources for the chemise. I'm glad I did that. I think I would have gotten the same product from the Truly Victorian pattern because, you know, in terms of hand sewing versus machine sewing, hand sewing takes longer, we know this, but this is also just like a bigger piece. It's fiddly. You know, it took me about 4 hours to make these, took me like 6 days to make this, so obviously there are pros and cons to both methods. So all in all, I do really like this product. They're super comfy. I've been doing class in them for like the last hour because I had to film a TikTok before this. And I can't wait to road test these out someday when I can go outside again and this pandemic is over. With all that said, I'm gonna get up nice and close to the camera. If you enjoyed this video, please come back soon for the process of making the corset and then the dress after that. And you can hit the subscribe button to be notified when that happens. Additionally, you can follow me on Instagram at Costume and Conservation and on TikTok at Costume and Conservation. If you don't want to do any of that, or even if you do, I wish you a wonderful day. See you later. Bye.